Hello, I'm Emily Hawthorne, a Middle East and North Africa analyst at Stratfor, a RANE company. This podcast is brought to you by Stratfor Worldview, RANE's premier digital publication for objective geopolitical intelligence and analyses. Sign up for the free Stratfor newsletter at worldview.stratfor.com.
Hello, I'm Ryan Bohl, a senior Middle East and North Africa analyst at Stratfor, a RANE company. This podcast is brought to you by RANE Intelligence. This week, I'm here with Clara Brackbill, our Sub-Saharan Africa analyst, to discuss the ongoing impacts of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on her region. Clara, great to be with you.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we know that one of the implications of the war is increasing global commodity prices. So how is this being felt in Sub-Saharan Africa, an area that's particularly vulnerable to fluctuations in commodities?
Yeah, so, as you just said, high commodity prices for everyday goods like food and fuel were prevalent throughout sub-Saharan Africa before the invasion even began. But now prices are truly unaffordable for the average consumer in nearly every context. Fuel prices are one area that's particularly problematic. So while fuel is actually subsidized by varying degrees in the continent's largest economies, even subsidized prices are now out of reach for average consumers. And, if governments are going to increase subsidies, it means that other areas of spending will likely suffer. And we see that generally in places like education and infrastructure development. And one country in which this is a particularly charged issue is in Nigeria. So high fuel prices have historically driven unrest, which is actually part of the reason why current President Buhari postponed the removal of Nigerian fuel subsidies until after his tenure is over, so as to kind of kick the can down the road a little bit so that he doesn't have to deal with the political and social fallout. And I say that just to illustrate, how much of an issue fuel prices are in the country. And this situation is made worse by the ongoing gasoline and diesel shortage, which is a result in part of a contaminated shipment in February that entered supply lines, which then led to very long lines at gas pumps, as well as high rates of exclusion for the informal sector, because basically they're boxed out of or priced out of the market. And we know in Nigeria, millions are employed in the informal sector. So, with all of this going on, the shortage and high prices also impact Nigeria's power generation capacity, because many households and businesses actually rely on diesel-powered generators due to the unreliability of public utilities. So, global commodity prices aren't happening in a vacuum. You can see in the Nigerian case how exorbitant fuel prices have third and fourth, sometimes fifth degree implications that are really raising the risk of unrest in a context like Nigeria.
Well, there's a lot of downsides, but of course, Africa is also an exporter of commodities. So are there any countries that could end up being, at least partial winners from this? Are some of them that might be able to wipe out some of the losses that they're taking from their imports if their exports are becoming more valuable?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, of course, producers of high value commodities will benefit from these high prices. And in Africa, we have oil and gas exporters as well as mineral and extractive exporters, just as two examples. So in the oil context, Nigeria, Angola, Equatorial Guinea will certainly make revenue windfalls for crude oil exports. And South Africa, like it did in 2021, will definitely gain increased revenue from things like coal, platinum group metals, gold, iron ore, among other exports. Zambia and DRC are two that will cash in on copper exports. Ghana will surely profit from gold exports. The problem, though, is that while these exports do lead to increased revenue, in the majority of these contexts, if not all, revenue windfalls can't directly compensate for consumer hardship. So, in authoritarian contexts, export revenue may not actually ever make it to state coffers, while in states like South Africa, existing challenges like rampant inequality, a current unemployment rate that's over 30%, require huge structural reforms to sufficiently improve living conditions that are making these price hikes so difficult to deal with. So, rarely do commodity exports directly benefit consumers in these contexts in the short term.
Well, that sort of leads me to my next question here, which consumers are going to be getting the short stick, so to speak, when it comes to imports. And that may cause some people to be quite angry with their governments and how state budgets are managed. So, but in addition to that, we know, of course, that Russia was deploying mercenary forces across Africa. So I wanted to ask you, how might both the impact of the changing value of commodities, as well as Russia's potentially pulling out some of its mercenaries, how might that all impact the security dynamics in sub-Saharan Africa?
Yeah, so it certainly will. I think there are two things to focus on here in terms of security dynamics. The first is that human rights organizations have expressed widespread concern that international attention will be entirely diverted to Ukraine, which the worry is that will leave very little appetite for aid or development projects in sub-Saharan Africa. And this is more of a medium-term implication as we look at the fallout from the war on Ukraine, whenever it may end. But I think we can expect significant international support for the people of Ukraine, which is, of course, understandable. But as we know, budgets are limited. So the logical conclusion there is that other projects, many of which are in sub-Saharan Africa, will fall by the wayside. And this matters for security because poverty, unemployment, lack of educational opportunities, lack of upward mobility, these are all factors that make populations more vulnerable to conflict and insecurity. And while we may not see this relationship play out directly in the next 2 to 3 months, it's safe to say that abandoned development projects aren't good for peace and security on the continent. And the second point I'll make is that that you actually alluded or spoke on in your question is that Russia's invasion means that the Kremlin, in addition to the international community, will be less focused on its involvement in ongoing conflicts in places like Sudan, the Central African Republic, and Mali. So, I think the case of Mali is perhaps one of the most obvious places where the implications will play out. We have France with its ongoing withdrawal of troops and relocation to southern Niger, which, we're worried, observers are worried, will leave a security void in the central and northern part of the country that the Malian junta was planning at least partially accounting for with Russian paramilitary troops, especially in the north. So while it's not clear yet what the implications are for paramilitary fighters specifically in Mali, Russian diversion of attention and likely resources from combating those insurgencies means that these Islamist groups like the Islamic State and JNIM will very likely face less resistance. So this is leading to fears among regional governments that North and Central Mali could easily become a safe haven from which militants can launch attacks into neighboring countries. So in combination with the first trend I mentioned, less international focus on African conflicts, the combination of these two could be hugely detrimental to West African security. And that's just one example of how this could play out.
Well, the global impacts of the Russian invasion are certainly having major changes in many regions, including sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you so much, Clara. For more geopolitical insight and intelligence, visit RANE Worldview at www.worldview.stratfor.com. I'm Ryan Bull. Thanks for listening.